are hence sometimes referred to as theory-laden because of small deviations of the result. Due to things such as not saying how big the room was that the experiment was done in, parts of the theory then need to be assumed in order to select and report experimental conditions. Norwood Russell, Hanson, Emery, Lakatos, and Thomas Kuhn have all done extensive work on theory-laden character of observation. In 1958, Hanson coined the term, claiming that all observation is dependent on the framework and conceptualization of the observer. Preconceptions can affect both observation and description. For example, watching the sunrise, two people can see different sunrises, though it's the same psychological phenomena. Parallax. Kuhn stated the route from the theory to measurement can almost never be traveled backwards. He also revealed that scientists generally have a theory in mind before experiments are even performed. Experiments that are needed to make experience observations based on evidence. This implies that the nature of the theory itself dictates how the theory is tested. Kuhn further argued, once it has been adopted by a profession, no theory is recognized to be testable by any quantitative test that it has not already passed. Philosophy of science looks at the logic behind science and the ethics that separate science from non-science. From at least one scientist, there are basic philosophic assumptions that form the basis. They're the base of scientific method. Reality is objective and consists of humans and consistent, and humans have the ability to perceive reality. Also, elements of the world have rational explanations. These assumptions from a discipline of methods, principles, and rules of nature, patterns, speech, techniques, theories, and depictions, from the base on which science can be grounded. Theories that criticize this assumption and have given their own account of the logic of science are philosophical systems based on positive facts and phenomena. Excludes speculation, and their philosophies believes knowledge derives from sense and experience. Those who show or prove that theories are false. Thomas Kuhn wrote in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, that when he researched the history of science, he found that what is being used now was dramatically different than what was then an adopted method. His observations do not say how science is or should be practiced. It is merely sociologically important. Paul Feyerabend similarly researched the history of science, causing him to deny that science is a system of methods, principles, and rules that regulate the art. He argued in his book Against Method that scientific progress is not due to applying any particular process for any specific norm or method of science in history you can find where violating it has contributed to the progress of science. Jokingly, he added, if believers in scientific method wish to express a single universal valid rule, it should be anything goes. Criticisms such as these have led to a radical approach in the sociology of science, which also led to a strong program. The postmodernists of science themselves have also been subjected to intense controversy as well. This conflicting debate between postmodernists and realists, which is overvalues an assumption, and which is full of overvalues and which is overvalues and assumptions, is known as the science wars. Postmodernists claim that scientific knowledge is nothing more than formal discussion and the equivalence of a sermon. Realists claim that scientific knowledge does reveal real and fundamental truths about reality. A lot of information has been written about this subject, taking on the challenge of postmodern observations while defending science as a legitimate method of finding truth. The art of silence was originally a mistake made by Greek philosophers who traveled to Egypt. These individuals wished to learn the inner meaning of life that Egyptians seemed to understand a bit more of. A symbol portrayed a naked child with his finger over his mouth is what started everything. Because of Aphrodite's indiscretions, she gave a rose to her son Eros, who in turn was to give it to Hippocrates in order to make sure that those indiscretions remained silent. This was the beginning to the term sub rosa, or under the rose. The evidence can be seen all throughout history. Of course, this story was handed down from the Egyptians to the Greek and finally into the hands of European royalty and nobles. Hippocrates became Horus, of course, and silence was symbolized by the rose. In old banquet rooms, roses can still be seen. Just look up at the ceilings where you see roses. That is where secrets were to stay. What was said and done in the banquet room stayed in the banquet room. Eventually, this practice was adopted by the church too. It's now called confessional. King Louis VII's entire family died when he was just a baby from smallpox. Because King Louis's governess refused to allow doctors to use bloodletting, he survived. Unlike his oldest brother who died earlier because of the practice. This, though, isn't part of the story, so I will move on. Being the only successor to his grandfather's throne at the age of 5, Louis VII was crowned King of France. According to history, King Louis died because of syphilis and left many illegitimate children. This was due to his cousin, twice removed, who was made regent until Louis was able to rule. Ruling in the king's place, the Duke of Bourbon, out of fear that his family might lose the throne to the House of Orleans, decided that the young king should have children as soon as possible. An heir had to be born, and before this young king was even old enough to mate, it seemed. At the age of 11, the king met his betrothed wife-to-be. For some reason, he just was not interested. Maybe if it wasn't for the fact that she was only 3, so they found him a replacement, a young princess from Poland who was old enough to conceive. It took 3 pregnancies, but finally an heir was born. At an early age, the king was introduced to sex. His thirst was unquenchable. Many female visitors appeared at the palace for late-night visits, and many children out of marriage were conceived. Because the king needed heirs to the throne, royalty placed sex above everything else. Henry VIII, what a bastard he was. The women he married and divorced at will, leaving the church for his desire for flesh, and at the end of his life being handicapped. His lack of children, though, and no male who could inherit his kingdom. This again brought the need for an heir. With one wife, he became so furious that he framed her for incest and adultery, claiming her to be a whore who had sex with family members. Being gracious, though, he allowed for her beheading to be done with a sword instead of with the customary blunt axe. It is now known about King James and his homosexual tendencies too. How he frequented playhouses and always in the company of young male companions. The idea that playhouses in London were not too reputable in those days, that would be unthinkable to most intellectuals today. Such foolishness. It's true, though. Only reprobates and homosexuals attended, and no royal subject would be caught there. This, though, isn't spoken. Stories concerning King James, Francis Bacon, Chris Marlowe, and Shakespeare himself have arisen from this topic. Some have claimed that Shakespeare did not exist. Mark Twain even traveled to London to investigate himself. Walt Whitman made a comment on the subject, but took no stance on the topic, of course, probably out of fear that his own sexual preferences would be questioned. Was Shakespeare a pen name for someone else to write under?